Okay, so let's talk about if your school does not have PBIS, but you like the concept and you want to think about having a PBS like classroom, right? So PBIS is school wide, that is the whole goal of it, but we can still look at some of the principles to apply to our classrooms to create success. So, again, PBIS is probably not for, 80 to 90% of your students, it's for the other 10 to 20%. But in order to have a successful classroom, we have to make sure all students are being supported. And if we're having behaviors that are um, not helpful to our classroom, let's put it that way, right? We are wasting a lot of time on redirecting and classroom management pieces that are taking away from teaching and learning. So sometimes we focus too much on the time it's taking away and don't actually set up structures that can prevent it in the long run. So one of the first things to think about when we're setting up a PBIS like classroom is establishing classroom norms. So we want to sort of stick away from rules and we want them to be all positively framed. So instead of, for example, I mean, this is sort of not a classroom, but no running in the hallways. Don't run the hallways, right? So instead we frame it positively, like walk slowly in the hallway, or um, you know, move between classes efficiently or something like that, right? So positive. So all of our rules should be positive and not rules. All of our framework on our classroom should be positive and everything should be posted. So it should be visual and they all should be positive, proactive statements, not don't, no, right? Those can be created as a class and but don't feel shy to guide some of that conversation. Um, the second piece of that is if it's not going well, right? So we establish these classroom norms, this framework for our classroom, and it's not going well. It's not, we're not making progress, right? We can revisit those norms anytime we not want. We don't have to just keep it going and barreling ahead. We can revisit those as a class and talk about what's not going right, what can we change, where's room for improvement, those types of things. Again, think of what I talked about before with an extinction burst, right? It's going to get a little worse before it gets better, so we have to stay the course for a period of time, right? That should not be 3 months, and we're still not making any progress. An important thing is we have to teach to that framework, right? So we have to show students how to do those things and model those behaviors, right? So part of that is we want to reinforce the behaviors that they're doing right? So if someone is raising their hand, we want to make sure we're praising that, right? We want to make sure we're catching them doing the good things and we're not focusing on the bad things, right? So PBIS is looking at positive, reinforce the things that are going right to shape those behaviors. So what we have to be careful about is falling back into reinforcing the negative behavior. So I'm going to give you another dog example, right? So my dog, I don't want my dog to bark when people walk by the house, but every time someone walks by, I come over, I say, Ollie, no, quiet, no, right? And I come near him and I tell him no. So I'm reinforcing that behavior versus the rest, so that was for 2 minutes he barked. But for the last half hour, he didn't bark. So how did I need to reinforce the positive behavior when it wasn't happening? And I may have forgotten all about it because he was being quiet. And that's lovely, right? So same thing in the classroom. If a student's not shouting out, right, and the student traditionally would be shouting out, I want to make sure that I'm saying, you know what? I'm going to use Sam again. Sam, it's really nice to see that you're being nice and quiet. I really appreciate that. That's amazing. And I want to be really positive about that. Again, make sure it is authentic. We can't have inauthentic reinforcement for students. The other thing is, and came up in some of your reflections, is my school is not PBIS, so reinforcers are really hard. What are we going to earn? I don't have a lot of money. I shouldn't be spending my money on this. That's all very true. So we have to think about things that we can control and that are free and that can be high value. So, for example, You have to talk to your administration about this, but, can kids earn, you can wear your hat in class pass. Can they have a snack when they shouldn't be in the classroom? Whatever, if they bring it in. Can they have an extra 5-minute break? Can they have a no homework pass, right? So sometimes teachers are like, no, we can't have a no homework pass. They have to do the homework. So if they don't do the homework, they're not successful the next day. Where do you want to cut your losses? Do you want to have them not be successful because behavior is a mess in your classroom, or do you want to maybe once a month they get a free homework pass? So we have to think about that. Seat choice. Maybe they get to pick their seat for the day. Maybe the class gets to have random, partners, or maybe. So think of things in your classroom that kids ask for that are natural type reinforcers that don't cost any money. Maybe you guys take an in-school classroom field trip where you go outside. Whatever it may be, there are definitely reinforcers that we can think of that don't cost money. And some kids actually just want time with you. I know that sounds crazy, but, could you earn lunch in the classroom and everyone comes and hangs out, and when you have lunch in the classroom, you get to play music or whatever it is, right? Sometimes the kids just want to hang out with you. So that can be a huge reinforcer as well, and that's a nice informal time to get to know kids. So that's sort of how we look at PBIS in the classroom in a setup nature. The other thing that we want to think about that we have the power to do when we look at a PBIS type classroom are having classroom contingencies. So, right, I can leverage the other students in my classroom to help another student, but I can't call them out on it. Let me give you an example. So, Sam calls out all the time, right? Is a big distraction, throws things around, always wants attention, right? Function of the behavior, attention. So I can talk to the class about this week. You know what? It's been a little disruptive in here. A lot of people are getting distracted. We're distracting each other. Let's really work on trying to control our impulses. And when someone's being distracting, right? Give a list of all the different types of things that could distract. Ask students what distractions may be, right? We have to teach this a little bit. And say, every time that I notice that students are not allowing distractions to take them off task, or they're not giving reinforcement to someone who's being distracting, we can earn. That's going to be our goal for the week. And maybe I have like a star chart, and so I literally every once in a while say, Beth, I really like how there's lots of distractions going on right now. I really like how you're staying focused, right? I really like how you didn't give, a reaction to, what's going on in the classroom, right? Don't say, I really like how you ignored Frank's inappropriate behavior. We don't say that, right? So we just talk about the general distraction concept, and we can reinforce that for other students. Of course, when that student is ignoring distractions or not being distracting, we can also reinforce that too to try to shape that behavior. But again, if the student wants attention, right, we can use our peers not to give attention to help that. Something else in that same situation is, when we talk about not letting distractions affect us in the classroom, we talk about ignoring. So we have to be careful, though, not to say to a student, I'm just going to ignore that, right? I like how you ignored Frank over there, right? So that you didn't ignore, you just acknowledged Frank was doing something. So you can't say a word when you were ignoring. You have to ignore. Pretend it's not happening. Don't acknowledge and say, I'm going to ignore you right now. Right? Because you just gave attention, reinforce the behavior. So we have to be careful of our words and how we use our words in the classroom. Again, I can't say this enough. We have to take ourselves out of it, and things have to be authentic. So, I said in the last video, kill your students with kindness. That's exactly what you have to do. Be positive all the time. It doesn't matter what happened in the next class. So when I taught a class of students that were all behavioral, every single day I had to take myself out of it, because I may have that student back in another half an hour, right? Because the students were allowed to come back to my classroom. I was their teacher. I could throw them out, but they would come back. So if a student told me to go F off the period before, so therefore they had to leave, right? That was the policy. I would then welcome them back and say, hey, bud, how's it going? Let's have a good science class. Like nothing ever happened. Because I can't hold that over their heads. As long as I hold that over their heads, we are never going to work out. That's never going to work out for us. And they have to be in your classroom every day. So I sort of go back to the idea of, um, so right, let's go back to my example of my husband prior, right? So my husband isn't following the things that I needed to help around the house with today, right? I wanted him to take out the garbage, I wanted him to empty the dishwasher, and whatever, right? I have a whole list for him. I keep telling him to do it, but he's technically ignoring me, right? Because it's not of high value to him. He's got something else as mine, whatever it is, right? So if I follow that example and I think about those steps to shape his behavior, right? I talked about before. Let's talk to him, talk to the kid, talk to the student in your classroom, right? So I may say to him, it seems like you're not hearing me. So what can we do? Because I feel like I'm nagging you, which is probably what he's thinking. And so he says, well, write it down for me. Make a list. Okay, sounds good. So I make the list, but I'm also smart enough to know that he needs to come in contact with a contingency, right? Or he needs to feel accomplished. If I put all 15 things on the list, he's never going to finish them. So therefore, I'm going to continue to nag him, right? So instead, I put 2 things on the list, 3 things on the list. And I also know he's reinforced by positive praise, right? So every single time I see him doing something, I can positively praise him. I like how you're doing that. Thanks for helping out. That's really great, right? So I can use those same behavioral principles. And the reason I know he likes positive praise, and let's call them words of affirmation, because if you've ever read the 5 Love Languages book, it's exactly the same thing we talk about with behavior, right? There's all functions of behavior, and there's all things that we all want, and we all want different things, and we can't assume one person wants the same thing as the other, right? Just because I want another one of the love languages, for example, is time, right? So just because I want time with my significant other, it doesn't mean my significant other a priority is time with me. It may be words, right? So for my husband's, let's say, is words of affirmation, I can't just keep spending time with him and not say positive things, not give him words of affirmation, because that's what he wants. I want time, right? So you think of those same things with our students in our classroom. What is motivating them? What is their want? What is going to drive them? What is going to build them up? What is their motivation, right? What is the underlying behavioral motivation? And then what is that reinforcer that we emotionally want? I'll even go back to the example that we talked about before, students not doing homework, right? So I keep giving the student a lunch attention. It's not changing his behavior because actually the student doesn't get a lot of attention at home. And so every time I get a lunch attention, I get to sit with my teacher. Even if it's not positive, it's still attention, right? It's still time that I'm not getting, and I get my homework done in a quiet setting. So keep giving me a lunch attention, right? So we have to think of what our behavior is actually reinforcing and what is supporting and how we're going to shape and change. So those would be some tips and some examples in that domain.